So far in this study, how has the study of these miracles helped your faith? So what in this and how has it helped you? Everybody still need coffee this morning? Too early to ask that kind of question? Well, then I'll talk. I was thinking this morning, we usually plan classes out 6 to 9 months, sometimes a year in advance. And I know this class was no different. John and the committee, they're putting things forward. I know for next year, they're already putting things in place for next year. And this was no different. This was done months ago before we knew we would be doing this via Zoom. And how are we going to do it? What are we going to do? Those questions that we filled in the interim. But I think the study for me has been really, really important to focus us on faith and the need to have faith in God. Our whole lives, and for the most part, all of us have had a challenge one way or the other, whether it be at work, whether it be family, whether it be a normal routine, and certainly dealing with our church family has been totally different for the last 6 months than we ever would have imagined. We had no way of understanding this or expecting this. So the fact that this study came at this time, I thought is pretty important. And yet it shouldn't surprise me because God's in control. And I think that's the whole point of all of these miracles, is showing us that God's in control. And there was a verse in studying this that hit me, and we'll study it later on, when Jesus reaches down and helps Peter up as he's sinking in the sea. Oh, ye of little faith. And I just keep thinking that of myself, that Jesus is looking at me, pulling me up and saying, oh, ye of little faith. And that's kind of what this class has done for me. Does anybody else want to share what this class has done?
John, maybe it's because I'm preparing for my class in a couple of weeks, but one of the things that strikes me as I look at all these stories is, that we tend to put limitations on Jesus, and I mean that because when you really look at these stories, we don't tend to realize what that power really is, especially now. We kind of hope and pray that things will change, that things will be better, and we don't put confidence in God's ability to make things happen and to know why we need to go through this time. And I think it's really extraordinary to dive into these stories, these encounters with Jesus, and really see how he impacted people's lives in the moment and for a lifetime. And it's just something that's been going through my mind over the past couple of weeks.
Anyone else?
One thing, it shows us that we are very much like the apostles. They were, even walking around with Jesus, they didn't really understand and didn't really believe in him to the extent that they were willing to turn themselves over to him fully. And that's our biggest problem today, is that, or at least mine, is that I want to be in control. And I'm, have messed things up royally at times and still do. But I still trust that God loves me and cares for me. And that's the hope that we have because of how he treated the apostles and his disciples.
Excellent point, Joseph. No matter how little faith we have, Jesus is always there to pick us up and to help us. If we'll look back to him, he's always there. So that's really, really good. Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I think it demonstrates the incredible patience that Jesus has and God has with us as our faith is growing. because time and time again, like you mentioned, the apostles weren't getting it. And you would think that, other leaders today, if they had folks that they were trying to train up who just constantly weren't progressing, they might be like, well, it's time to get some more followers, and work with different people. But he allowed them to grow. He understood where it was coming from. And I think that's kind of gives us hope as, we may struggle through things, and God doesn't just abandon us because of that.
Thank you, Clark. Kevin, did you have your hand up you wanted to say?
Yes, what I wanted to speak on was when we were talking last week about the feeding of the 5,000, the one thing that came clear to me is that the people constantly wanted Jesus to do a miracle. They would see miracles. They just didn't seem to remember that he did all these other miracles. And each time he'd do a lesson, or each time he would perform a miracle, they would be coming to him asking him, show us another miracle. It became sort of almost a circus to them, that they wouldn't believe in Jesus as who he was unless he would perform another miracle. And in very much the same way, the world is like that today. We're constantly looking for God to get rid of this virus, or to heal our economy, or to give us our jobs back, find a better education for our children, show us a miracle to get us a new home. Whatever it is that we're looking for, we're constantly looking for God to show us some kind of a sign or a miracle in order to have faith and believe in who he is and the control and the guidance that he has in our lives. He's always there for us.
Always there for us. Really good. Well, let's take a look at what we have studied in the past. So can you give me back control, John, real quick? Or Clark, whoever took it. So I can share the screen.
You've got
I
it.
have it now? All right, here we go. So here's what we have studied so far. We started way back, eons ago, it seems, with John kind of introducing the purpose and the idea of the finger of God touching. And that's kind of what everybody has said we've had God, seen God working in lives, see him working in the apostles' lives, and how it can translate into us. And Clark discussed turning the water into wine, the first recorded miracle. John driving out an evil spirit, and Richard healing the crippled man, then Dwayne about the legion, then Hoptu, just as you believed, and then Brett with the Canaanite woman's daughter, that it wasn't just Jews, the family of God, that could be healed, and Hoptu had the same. And then Chris last week with the feeding of the 5,000. So any of these stood out to anyone or really touched anyone in a manner that, that lesson was the right lesson that day for me? Anybody have any comments on that? All right. So we're going to get in, and today we're going to look at Matthew chapter 8 and Matthew chapter 14. It's recorded in a few other places in Scripture, in Mark and Luke records them as well. But we're going to look at Matthew's writing in Matthew 8, and it is the disciples in a boat, and problems occur. And then the second one is where we all study this as little kids. We like it. It's great. Peter walking on the water. So we're going to look at that. So kind of question to get us going. Have you ever really been afraid or scared? Nobody's ever been afraid?
Sure, you're not expecting the answer no for that question, right?
Yeah, I'm kind of like, I've got some real good ones, but I'd like to hear from y'all.
You don't want to admit it.
Don't want to admit it? Well, then I'll start off because mine's pretty embarrassing. As everybody knows, I grew up in Texas and still have the house there. We will be going later this week there. We have a lot of barns that we keep grain and feed and equipment and all of this other stuff in. And from time to time, rats infest the barns. And so we do everything we can to get rid of the rats. Normally it is me going out with a .22 and rat shot and trying to shoot the rats in the barns. And they're only a couple hundred yards from the house, so I quite often go by myself. It is dark, it is night, and a lot of times there is no light in the barn. So imagine a creepy old barn, tin, you know, if there's any breeze, the tin's creaking. And this particular barn, we kept a truck in. Now, some of the workers were not the best drivers of trucks that we had, and this truck had both doors knocked off of it. So there were no doors on this truck, and it was in the barn. And the other thing that was a component of the barn at that time was a dog had walked up. We live way out in the country, so people dump dogs out by us on a regular basis, and that's how we get most of our dogs have just been dumps that we decide to adopt and keep. And there was this dog that enjoyed staying around, and they fed him from time to time, so he hung around and we were nice to him. So this dog was in the barn. I'm out walking into the barn, and imagine a good, again, very, very dark, very, very creepy, creaky barn. And all I've got is a flashlight and a little headlight on my cap. And I walk up, and I want the best advantage of the barn. So I walk up and I lean against the truck at the driver's, where would have been a door, no door. So it's basically leaning against the opening in there. What I did not know at the time is the dog slept in the driver's seat of the truck. So I'm going through the rafters of the barn with my light, seeing if I can see any rats. And the dog is, unknown to me, behind me. And he gets up and he leans over and he licks my ear. I can tell you, when I am extremely scared, I stand and I scream like a little girl. So now I have a dog looking at me like, what's wrong with you? You know me, we're friends. And takes me a few minutes to get down. I don't know if I got any rats that night or not. I do remember the dog scaring the bejeebers out of me. So that's rather embarrassing. So I doubt if y'all have anything any more embarrassing than that. Again, I just stood there and screamed like a little girl. Anybody else been afraid? Nobody wants
It would
to
be hard to, John, it would be hard to top that one.
What, the screaming like the little girl?
The whole thing.
Well, I can speak to my time when years ago, my sister and I, when we were visiting my grandparents up in New Jersey, my cousin David, who was an artist, was going to school at Pratt University in New York City. Well, David invited us to come with him to New York City to see the World Trade Center.
Thing on robots.
But it was still up. So here we went through the Lincoln Tunnel and on the subway, and we get off and we come out to the World Trade Center lobby. And I decided to go outside to see if I could see the top of the building. And I went outside and I could not see the top of the building. And it started to give me a woozy effect because I'm kind of afraid of heights. I just get really shaky. So we get in the elevator and we go up the elevator, which took a few minutes to get to the 107th floor. And I remember when we got off the 107th floor elevator, Lisa and my cousin just walked right on out there. No big deal. For me, I stood against the inside wall and slowly moved my way up to the concession counter because I was deathly afraid of looking out the window. And they had planters around in front of the windows, and these little steps that you could go down 3 steps and sit in a chair and literally be your knees up against the window looking 107 floors down. It took me probably an hour before I could actually get to the point of getting close to the planters so I could get down the stairs and sit there on a chair and look to see if I could see Kojak running around the streets of New York. So my sister and my cousin decided that they were going to go to the roof on the 110th floor. And I said, no, this is as far as I'm going. Get me to the ground as soon as possible.
Yep.
So that was one of my scariest moments.
Thank you, Kevin. All right. Has anyone ever done something that they didn't believe they could do? Or have you helped somebody do something they didn't think they could do? Your kids, you know, I know riding bicycles is something I can't ride. Don't take the training wheels off. You know, some kids are very bold. Other kids are, you know, no, I always want my training wheels. Anybody got a good story about doing something they didn't believe they could do?
I feel bad.
This is Nicole here. So I used to travel for the Air Force when I worked for them overseas, and I had the opportunity to go to New Zealand. Some people were going bungee jumping, and I thought it was really cool, wanted to do it. So I went with them to go bungee jumping. Once we got there and I saw the bridge, kind of like Kevin, I was like, no way am I doing this. So I stood there on the side for about 2 hours while everybody else went, and then finally decided right before it was time to go that I was going to do it, you know, once in a lifetime opportunity. Suited up, stood on the bridge, and then had to bring myself to, you know, take the steps up to the edge and jump off, which was crazy. So, you know, it took about 2 hours to work up. I didn't think I would be scared, but as soon as I got there and I saw it, there was just like all these emotions and like, you know, hot fire like going through me, like, don't do it. Of course I did it anyway, but yeah, so that was something that was just like totally random. I just never expected.
Don't know that I could bungee jump, Nicole. Not even sure I could have younger. Certainly can't now, but even my younger days, I don't know that I could have bungee jumped. So wow, that's impressive. Yeah, that's really impressive.
Or silly.
Yeah, I guess if they had tied me up and thrown me off, I would have gone. But that's about what it is. I've had several people try to talk me into jumping out of an airplane parachute, and I don't. That doesn't interest me at all. So I look at those two about the same. So I know some people do it for fun. I don't get it. But thanks, Nicole. That's pretty good. Yeah, fear of heights. Yeah, Kevin, that's definitely something that gets a lot of people, and it's a tough one. It physically affects us. That fear can physically affect us. So let's look at the first miracle here. So I'm going to share a screen again, and we'll go to the next slide. I can pull it up here, and would somebody be willing to read this?
Sure. And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him, and behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves, but he was asleep. And they went and woke him, saying, "Save us, Lord, we are perishing." And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, O you of little faith?" Then he rose and rebuked the wind and the sea, and there was a great calm. And the men marveled, saying, "What sort of man is this, that even the winds and sea obey him?"
Thank you, Anthony.
Mm-hmm.
What's your takeaway from this miracle happening, this whole scene here? Anybody have any specific takeaways that they get on it? So let's look at who was in the boat. The disciples. What was the makeup of the disciples?
Fishermen.
They were experienced fishermen.
Right.
Experienced fishermen. How bad did this storm have to be that a group of experienced fishermen were frightened?
Yeah, very, right.
It would have to be a storm the size of Laura.
Wow.
The Sea of Galilee was known for its storms and great storms. We don't have as some of the others where they were. We just know they were, they got in the boat. Was Jesus asleep because he was that tired, or was he that calm and that confident that nothing in the sea would hurt him, or both?
I think both, John.
Yeah, I said both.
Pretty amazing. Kevin, when you talk about your, and Nicole as well, would taking a nap have worked on top of the World Trade Center at that time? Could you have taken a nap and go, I'll just sleep here for a little bit? Or Nicole sleeping on that bridge?
No. I mean, yes, I would have liked to have closed my eyes, but there would be no leaping, that's for sure.
Yeah, so Jesus is asleep in the boat. They did have confidence to go wake Jesus. Do you think they got what they expected after they woke Jesus up?
No.
First question is, oh, you have little faith. And I know they're probably looking at Jesus and looking at the waves. Again, experienced fishermen fearing for their life. And Jesus goes, why are you afraid?
Well, once again, they're looking for another miracle.
Yeah.
To get them out of this horrendous situation that they've been in before, perhaps. But now, what do we do now? They all look at each other and let's go to Jesus. Maybe he can get this thing solved. So they must have gotten blown away with amazement. I don't know.
Well, the waves were swamping the boat. In other words, water was coming in the boat. And they probably was, bailing water as fast as they could, and they needed more help. So Jesus is asleep. Come over here and help us. Hey, you sleeping over there and we're about to drown. Get up and help us to, bail some water. And I suspect that's probably what they had more in mind. Their faith wasn't strong enough to understand that Jesus had control of the waves and the wind and the whole universe. And so, all they were saying is, help us get out of this situation by helping us bail water and, keeping the boat afloat. But, and that's kind of, our faith is that he can help us, but only a little,
Yeah. And that would have been a help. Just bailing water would have been a help.
Yeah. but a little bit of help,
But a little bit of help. And he has great big amounts of help, doesn't he? And I think you started us off. We sometimes limit what we believe Jesus can do. And I've had some of those this summer. I've had some of those challenges of seeing other people have great faith and not limiting what can be done. So they've seen
John,
Jesus. Go ahead.
I think two things that stand out to me is like the way that he calmed it, I think is interesting because he spoke to it. And he didn't necessarily have to speak to it, but he did use his words to stop it. And that mirrors what we saw even in the creation story. So when when the seas and the waves were being created, God spoke them into existence. And now Jesus uses his words to stop them. But it says he rebuked them. And I found that the word rebuke to be interesting because it's not just he calmed them. It's almost like he was saying that they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing, which I don't know if that's the wrong interpretation for rebuked here, but like usually when you hear someone being rebuked, it's like they've done something wrong.
That is interesting. I did not study that word, Clark, so I apologize that I don't have. Can't address. Anybody else want to make any comments about that?
I agree with you, Clark. It's kind of like when you yell at your kids for messing around in the shopping mall or something of that nature. It's kind of what he's doing here with the waves.
All right. That's good. Stop it. And it did. So we see Jesus being very relaxed. We see him then get up and rebuke the waves. Are there later on in Scripture, do we have recorded times where several people who were in the boat were in tough situations and yet they appeared to be relaxed in their demeanor?
Well, would that be Paul when he was shipwrecked?
Paul probably wasn't in the boat, but yeah, Paul showed that definitely Paul had plenty of opportunities to show that he was relaxed with things, confident, calm, understood that Jesus was in charge. Paul had numerous times.
Even when he was bit by the snake and everybody thought that he would just be dead in minutes, and he didn't die.
Didn't die. That's really good example. Paul's got numerous good examples of calm, relaxed confidence in Jesus and what's going on. Did Peter have any? Peter in the jail. They were going to basically execute him the next day. And he was sleeping so soundly, took the angel a little bit to wake him up. That's sleeping pretty soundly to have an angel have trouble waking you up. Joseph, you want to make comment?
Well, yeah, there's another one who was calm and sleep in the boat, and that was Jonah, but who was running away from God. And he was just as calm as he could be down below sleeping. And, hey, if it goes down, it goes down. He didn't care.
Yeah, when you're running from God, that's, yeah. Good study. Good thing to bring up, Joseph. That's another good. So Jesus rebuked the wind and it went calm. Verse 27 says, the men marveled, saying, what sort of man is this that even the winds and the waves obey him? They'd seen him do other miracles. Why did this miracle cause them to marvel?
Hey, John, I think like all of the miracles are so impressive, but I think them seeing him control like nature, I guess we look at like, in a storm or, storms, earthquakes and things of this nature is just things that are like uncontrollable, the scale and the sheer power of them. And so I guess in some ways, just being able to control something so vast and so powerful, and it just immediately listen to his voice and just, I like how in Mark, he just says, peace, be still. And it's over and done with, just like that. I mean, it's not like, a gradual ramping off is what I get. Just immediately it responds to his voice. And I think they're starting to get an idea of the sheer power and starting to figure out like, who Jesus is. This isn't just, any other prophet that has come before. Like, they're starting to see in their minds the Son of God.
I think Chris nailed it, but I would add that, I forget, well, someone had said it a few minutes ago that these were experienced fishermen, that they were accustomed to storms on the sea. And yet this storm really worried them. They were very, very concerned. They were frightened for their lives. for them to see this great calm happen so quickly. I mean, there's nothing here that doesn't say that, you know, it was immediately calm. I can't even imagine what that would be like. I've been out of the ocean a couple of times, not I think in a great storm, but to see the waves go from huge white, you know, caps to nothing, just calm. That must have been extraordinary. I can't even imagine, you know, what that must have been like to experience that moment.
Hey, John, to add to that, so I did a tiger cruise with my brother when he was in the Navy and came back from Hawaii to San Diego. And we were skirting a hurricane, and we came up north and the waves were tremendous. It was unbelievable. Woke up the very next morning and the entire Pacific Ocean was like glass. It was unbelievable. And that's when I said I will never be in the Navy, because anything that can do that with that much strength and power is just, I don't want any part of that. Just scares me, that kind of strength. So it kind of talking to what he was just saying there. The other part that I'd like to say to this too is this, I love this verse right here, because it also speaks to, and not trying to bring up any modern topic or anything else, but it also speaks to people who claim to be Christians to believe the global warming thing. You know, it's like I look at this, it seems to me like if he can calm the waters of this and he can control the weather and everything else, you know, where's our faith in that it'll be all okay in that regard? And I think that also breeds into what they were thinking in the ship as well. Where's the faith that he could do this? I mean, just how incredible. Hard to comprehend.
The amount of energy in a hurricane is absolutely unbelievable. And, you know, I've said that's one nice thing. Our house in Texas is about 120 miles from the coast. And we have had hurricanes come through in my lifetime with winds over 90 miles an hour at our house. And that's a long way from the coast to have that much power when it hit us. And just Texas loses a coastal town about once every 10 years in my life, what I've seen. I go back in and rebuild, and it's just what people do. And, you know, I enjoy going visiting their places, but don't want to live there. But you're right, Dwayne. It's just incredible. Clark, did you want to make a comment?
Well, I think it was, for me, it's their response was interesting too, because they respond like even the storm obeys him. Like it seemed like it was almost levels of miracles. I know we've been talking about kind of, you know, they've seen these other miracles before and they still want to see more, but I think even it was the type of miracles, which is incredible that, I mean, they've already seen people being raised from the dead. They've seen people that were sick who are now healed, but even this now, the storm seemed to increase their faith even further.
Well, Clark, thank you. You've done it again. Perfect segue into my next question. What was the result of this miracle? You've already answered one of it, calm seas. What else did it do?
Really brought home to the disciples the power of God, the power of Christ.
That increased their faith?
Yeah.
It caused them to think and to ask the question, who is this guy that we've been following all this time?
Exactly.
Who is this? So it calmed the sea, calmed the disciples, and increased the faith. And hopefully our studying of it will calm us and increase our faith. All right, let's turn to Matthew chapter 14. See if I can share screen again. I'm going to do this.
Wait till next year.
Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 through 31. Would somebody like to read that, please?
Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?"
Thank you, Chris. One thing I kind of want to reading a commentary on this, and I thought it was rather interesting. Verse 22, various versions have different language. Compelled is used. Verse 22, he made the disciples get in the boat. I think the disciples knew, maybe the weather was not conducive for going by boat across the sea. They may have known this. Again, experienced fishermen, they know the sea, they know the area, but Jesus made the disciples get in the boat and go before him. So I think there's some trust, some faith, and some value shown here in verse 22. What time of the day, and I never did find this out, so I'm just asking if anybody has done a study, what time of day do you think that verse 22 occurred? He put them in a boat, sent them on the way, and dismissed the crowd. What time of the day do you think, and it'll play on a little bit later as we look at this miracle as it develops?
I would say it was sometime in the evening because he was about to dismiss the crowd to go home, which means he had been speaking pretty much all day.
Anthony, were you wanting to say something?
Oh, no, I wasn't. I'm sorry. I was thinking, I was breathing out loud. breathing heavy.
All right.
I was reading the commentary about it, but then sorry about that. I was on the fourth watch already, so I was trying to count back.
We know what time the fourth watch is. The fourth watch is somewhere between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. in the morning.
Right. So I was trying to count back a little bit.
So we dismissed, and again, I kind of think it makes sense. We're speculating. We have no clue what time it was. Scripture does not tell us. There is no way of knowing, but it makes sense that it would be toward the evening, probably at sundown, dusk, something along those lines. So they didn't want to go. They were made to get in the boat and, basically go on over, I'll meet you. So Jesus went up to the mountain and prayed. I think it's pretty telling. Again, this goes down to how long Jesus went away and spent in prayer this evening. He'd had a hard day. It was a difficult day for him. It had been a long day for him. And then he goes up to the mountain and he prays. So if he ends up on the sea around 3 o'clock and they're about 3 miles out to sea, somewhere between 3 and 4 miles is where they were out. And where they were crossing at, the Sea of Galilee is 6 miles wide. So let's say they're 3.5 miles or just over halfway. If he dismissed the crowd at, say, 8 o'clock in the evening, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus went away for basically 5, 6, 7 hours and prayed on the mountain. And that's pretty telling that Jesus, the Son of God, spent that much time at that event praying. And then he walks, may have taken him an hour to walk 3 or 4 miles, from the mountain over. And so let's look at how would you be in a boat? And it doesn't indicate that they were terribly afraid of the weather. It was just causing them a lot of problems because they had been going now for, again, 7 hours against the wind and only made 3.5 miles. So really they're doing about a half a mile an hour. That's pretty slow, isn't it? I know, Dwayne, you were talking about being on a big boat. Y'all were going quite a bit faster than that, I assume.
Oh yeah, we're going really fast.
So that meant when the weather was bad, y'all were really rough.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, the waves were so big. They were probably 7-10 stories tall, and it was like going on 8 crate. If you picture that. So you go down into the trough, and then you come up onto the crest, and you could see forever, and it just looked like massive. Yeah, 8 crate is just what it looked like. It was very intimidating.
Probably equally intimidating, and I think you pointed out the next day it was calm. Just to go from one to the other, that probably equally as intimidating, much more comforting and calming, but equally intimidating.
Absolutely.
Why did they think it was a ghost walking on the water?
Well, who would have believed that somebody would walk out onto the water and approach a boat in the middle of a storm out in the middle of, the Sea of Galilee?
Who could believe it? Who could believe it? That's right. But Jesus said, I'll meet you over there.
Of course, it never went through their mind, how was he going to get there?
Never did, didn't he? Never did. So I think it's funny. What was Jesus's first response? We can kind of look in verse 27. What did he do the first thing?
Told him, don't be afraid.
Be afraid, it's I. So, bad weather, strong winds opposing him. Don't be afraid. There ever been a time where you were afraid and somebody said, don't be afraid?
Oh, yeah.
Did it help?
That would be the first time that I dove off of a diving board into the deep end.
Did them telling you not to be afraid help, Kevin?
It took me a while to jump. Then that came full circle years later when I had my own son, Matthew. Yep. And here I was, dog paddling and treading water in the deep end for probably 15 or 20 minutes while my son stood at the end of the diving board, deathly afraid to jump at the age of about 5 years old. And I kept encouraging him, don't be afraid. I'm here to help you, jump. And
I think Kevin makes a great point, John. I think it depends on who is telling you not to be afraid. If it's someone you truly love and trust, a parent who is looking out for you, who has your best interest at heart, then that's probably words that you take greater comfort in than if it's some stranger on the street that says, hey, don't be afraid. It's like, well, no, there's a car coming. It's like, but I think that's just very different to hear that from someone who loves you.
Who's telling you don't be afraid is a whole lot. And I think that's important. How many scriptures, what you really have as your confidence in your friends. So we want the right people telling us not to be afraid of the right things. And that's big. But first thing he says is don't be afraid. It's I. Do you think that calmed them down? Did that help? I think it did, because definitely Jesus is one of those. If he says, don't be afraid, they'd already seen what he could do to the wind. Of course, we do see numerous times where the apostles had difficulty remembering that.
Once again, there's yes, they saw him stand in the boat and speak to the wind and the waves and calm them down. But now, here he is walking on top of the waves and walking through the wind. And this is even perhaps a greater miracle, because everyone knows that if you step out of a boat, you're going to sink like a rock. And fortunately for Peter, he had enough faith at that time to answer the call as Jesus put out his hand basically and said, yes, come. And he just gets out of the boat and starts walking. But then as soon as he's within an arm's reach of Jesus, he realizes, wait a minute, what am I doing? And he starts to sink. And then Jesus reaches out and saves him.
Very, very important. Thank you, Kevin. You just taught my next section, so I appreciate that. You worded it better than I had planned. So thank you, Kevin. Jesus said, come. You know, Peter goes, hey, I want to come out there. And Jesus says, come. And he comes. And he's out there walking on water. And pretty impressive. Pretty impressive what Peter did. Why do we spend so much time in this section? Preaching. I've preached lessons on it. You look away and we look at the failure of Peter and not the success of Peter here. Peter walked on water, and yet we spend all of our time teaching the lesson of Peter turned his eyes away and he sunk and had to have Jesus save him.
I think that depends on what lesson you want to be taught or what lesson you're trying to teach, because I've heard it, in the past too, where they say, well, the focus was on Peter looking down and not keeping his eye focused on Jesus. So if the lesson is keep your eye focused on Jesus, that's what you want to teach about, right? So I think it kind of depends on the lesson that you're trying to teach, because in verse 28, when I was looking at it again just now, where it said, Lord, if it be thou, it made me think about he had some doubt there, because he said, if it be thou. He didn't just come out because he said, hey, I'm coming out. He said, if it be thou, bid me to come on the water. So it made me think about when Satan was, it's not the same, obviously, but when Satan was saying, if you be who you say you are, then do this, right? So I think that when Peter said, if it be thou, he wasn't still sure, I don't think, at that particular point that it was him.
Yeah.
So there still be a little bit of doubt from Peter's mind. Why would he say, if it be thou, instead of saying, Lord, okay, here I come, or, whatever.
John,
go ahead, Al.
John, I think we're harsh with Peter here because
right.
Because we see in Peter a lot of ourselves. We really want to be the people that are so fixated on Jesus and we're able to do great things, and yet we know that we look away. We know that we have moments where we have worry or doubt in our hearts, and it causes us to slip. And
right.
This is really, really close to home. We know that this is a moment where someone is actually doing something that is extraordinary, and Jesus is making this happen for them. But it's just so easy to slip, and I think that it is hard for us as followers of Jesus to see this and know that this is something that's going to come up in our lives. But Jesus is there, though. I mean, it's comforting in that he's there and he will take our hand and guide us. But there's just something about us that really sticks with us. So
I couldn't agree more, and thank you for kind of wrapping that up.
And one thing I want to add to that, John, is because I heard another lesson on this recently, and something that I thought was interesting is that the guy that was giving the lesson, he had visited this area, and he said that the mountain where Jesus, they believe, had gone up to pray, like the only one that would have made sense around there, Sea of Galilee, that he would have seen the ship that they were on the entire time. So even while they were so concerned about this storm, he was up there praying, but he also was able to keep his eye on them, watching them. And to me, I'm like, that's just a great reminder of what God's always doing, that when we're in the midst of our struggles and we feel like we're, lost or sinking, like God's always there. He's always watching.
Thank you, Clark. Some great lessons in this miracle. Again, we can see where those on the boat use this later. In Hebrews 12:2, let us fix our eyes on Jesus. Pretty good example of what happened to Peter, and how I think you put it so well, why we spend so much time on the negative side here of Peter looking away and needing Jesus, because it resonates with us. And we fall away and we know we need Jesus. We need that hand to help us. Looks at us and go, oh, you of little faith. And he raises us up. Hop to, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I know we're out of time, but Jesus says that before Peter started walking, Jesus said, take courage. It is I. And then Peter started going. So I think it is easy to start something fast with being emotional and what have you. But I think the key is how you are going to finish it. And in order to finish it, you just got to have that courage, and that you ought to have in order to go the length of your faith and your journey. So, yeah, we beat on Peter often, but the fact is, I don't think even Peter himself at that moment kind of took a minute to think about this. You said, come, and then, what would be the consequence, the good, the bad, the different. I mean, he didn't have that much time to do that. We don't know. But again, it just, for me, shows me that it's easy to start anything. But the key is how you are going to finish it. Because there are going to be a lot of pitfalls, a lot of temptations, a lot of problems on the path. And then you just got to remember, you got to have that courage that Jesus would be always with you, because you have to focus on him.
The action part of faith requires that courage. You're absolutely correct. And I think that's the lessons here that we need to have out of both of these. We need to be calm, knowing that Jesus is in control. But that should give us courage to reach out and do the things and stand up and do what the tasks that God has put us here to do. And it requires courage. So we see these men that were in that boat these two times. They learned the lesson eventually. It took them a little bit, but it took two pretty big miracles for them to learn the lesson and then stand up and have that courage to walk and to do what they need to do. And they changed the world. They truly changed the world with their faith and their courage. Anybody else have any last thoughts? Hope to see y'all in an hour, and have a great Sunday. Thank y'all for your participation and your help. Thank you very much.